start by assuming that you know. I've got a very big dog. I'm going to start by assuming that you know who these amazing women are. Or do I need to tell you a bit about them? Okay. That means I need my notes. Yay. Okay, I'm going to start with Zelda, who is one of the best known of Britain's curators. She curates globally. We actually nearly met in the late 70s because we both went to Brighton, and I would never have done the course I did if it hadn't been for Zelda, almost inventing it. She worked at the Photographer's Gallery for a number of years before opening Zelda Cheatle Gallery and having publishing, and she is a powerhouse and an exceptional woman working in photography. Hannah is a younger version of, maybe so bold. Hannah is the director of Trolley Books and also a gallery called TJ Boulting, who at the moment is showing an amazing exhibition on exploring body politics, which I think will be very relevant to our talk, or to our chat. Olivia was a mathematician, studied at Oxford, has been a member of Magnum for many years now. I don't know when you were... Three, sorry. Sort of making this up as I go along. She's worked with many women-based projects, and she worked on an incredible series, which what became a book, in Saudi Arabia. Everybody will tell you much more about themselves when we get there. Emma Blau is an award-winning British photographic artist, curator. She was the director of a gallery when she was about 21, Tom Blau Gallery, and she looked about 12. She has worked for British Vogue, Wallpaper, Sunday Times. She's a broadcaster. She works in online media. She has the most incredible exhibition on at the moment, which is called Face Forward, which is in Lisson Grove, which she shot in her local area of Westminster, and it nearly killed her. So anybody who likes dealing with art groups is one thing. Local, I can't think of the word, councils, thank you, is another. Alixandra Fazzina is an artist. She was a war artist in Bosnia. She is somebody that I've worked with and been very proud to work with in documentary. She is multi-award winning. Her book, A Million Shillings, is possibly profoundly one of the best photographic books that's ever been published.
By Trolley.
By Trolley. And she lived long-term in Pakistan, had a baby there, and she will talk about herself because she's exceptional. So I think I've done everyone. I'm going to read something first, which actually Anastasia Lind, you probably read it, it was in Time magazine. It said, in a recent, it's a tiny snip of something. In a recent World Press photo report, 1,556 photographers were surveyed on the state of news photography. Beyond the issues around image manipulation and objectivity that have gripped our industry in recent years, the results put the accent on a more concerning issue, that of representation. Nearly 65% of respondents originated from Europe and North America, and only 15% were women. More disconcerting was the lack of comprehensive figures reflecting the crippling and underrepresentation along socio-economic, racial, and sexual orientation factors. So today we are looking primarily, and well, actually we're only looking at being a woman in photography. And the question that I would like to ask, sitting here in 2016 at Photo London, is, do we still need a discourse on the role of women in photography? Why are we here? Are female photographers categorized? How do young women photographers navigate which I still feel is a very male-dominated process. Do women feel isolated? And I'll go to now to Zelda. How have things changed? Have they changed since you first began to work in photography?
Good question. I think what I'm going to do is start running through some of the slides that I brought, because that will help answer that question. So if I can hide this from Taya,
I'm going to just interject to say that we're going to make it quite short, but we really, really want this to be conversational, and also that we're all family here. And anything you have to say, I would love to hear, and we all would love to hear it. And it's about being very honest. So that's...
the slides I'm going to show you are the series. There's 15 curators that I just worked with in Dubai. I did a big exhibition that was commissioned by the Crown Prince, and it was to show how photography had evolved from the 20th century into the 21st. And as I started in the late 1970s, and it's 2016, I was kind of hoping that this is Alistair Foster from Australia, who actually had a very boring exhibition, but he did quite a lot of women photographers, which is good. That was Yata Canabrava from Brazil. He seems to have entirely disappeared. Which actually is what he was like. He would often disappear. He is a publisher, and he did an exhibition that was absolutely beautiful of modernism, but the plinth on his right extended 9 meters, and it was a book that extends out to 20 meters, but it was a panorama of Sao Paulo by a woman photographer. This is the Chinese curator, which is unbelievable. I've forgotten his name, but it's... The work is Jan Preston on the right. We managed to have several. I think all of the curators except this one, called Ayman Lotfi, who was from Egypt, that I didn't appoint. The UAE appointed him. He, in a forum that Cheryl actually witnessed, this man said that he thought that women shouldn't actually exhibit on the same walls as men, that possibly that women shouldn't be carrying heavy camera bags, and that really they should be at home concentrating on interior design. Now, I had thought it was funny, but actually he meant it. It was completely serious. So this is why some of Cheryl's questions, this is very relevant, that in Egypt there's somebody like him. And this is Fanny Escoulon, who did the show for France, and that is Antoine Dagata. All of the work that was exhibited in Dubai had to be vetted by the Royal HIPA, this organization. And it's extraordinary that Dagata, who's a very controversial French photographer, they loved these. This is Kinchesh Karoli, who was the Hungarian and Czech Republic curator. Devika Singh, who's the daughter of Raghubir Singh, she did a really exceptional exhibition, and she's standing in front of, she did a lovely Dayanita Singh wall, but she's standing in front of Saurabh Hura, who's the newest addition to Magnum, so you must know this work that's about his mother. It's a very, very beautiful series. Well, in order to get that work in there, I was crying. I took 7 hours of trying to explain what the work was about, but in fact it looked amazing, and Devika did an absolutely beautiful exhibition.
Zelda, can I just ask you something? Can I ask you, was there a female on his Hamdan's, His Highness Hamdan's committee?
Yeah, there was 2 females, but they never spoke. But it was basically the men that spoke. Magnolia de la Garza, it was the Mexican curator. She did a show about architecture that was beautiful. She had pictures from people I'd never heard of. It was an exquisite exhibition. This was very controversial. This is Hisham Khanidi. He did an exhibition because of the young photojournalist who'd been killed about a month before this exhibition. He had 4 young women, all under the age of 30. Oops, the daisy. 4 young women, and that's a good idea. The UAE actually didn't want any of these young women's work to be shown, but we won, and it was shown, and it was very strong. It was very important about Yes, the male gaze on the female. It was all young Moroccans. It was great. This is Federica Angelucci. She did a very, very lovely South African exhibition. She works at the Stevenson Gallery, and she was great. And Natasha Egan did a portrait of the United States. She did a different artist for each decade. And so she started with Dorothea Lange. And in fact, that went down incredibly well. Everyone knew the migrant mother. And she had Moira Davey from Canada and Alex Soth. And she was really fantastic to work with. And this is Frank Wagner, who's from Berlin. And he did again, an absolutely beautiful exhibition. He's standing to the right of Frank Wagner is a self-portrait by Katharina Sieverding, who was one of Joseph Beuys's students. This is the gorgeous Els Barents from Amsterdam. Her exhibition was 4/5 by women artists. This is Mariko Takut. She's standing to the left of her is, I've just forgotten the name of that artist. She's someone who trained at Chelsea, and she lost her studio and most of her work in that terrible earthquake recently. And her name is Lieko Shiga. Thank goodness I remembered. Jassim, who's the man at the front, was the curator for UAE. He did his MA in Nottingham and Trent. He was such a nice man. He had spent 20 years as a forensic policeman. He taught a lot of young women photography, and he was the one that had encouraged some of the most exceptional work that Cheryl and I both had really liked. There was a young Bedouin girl who'd been married at 16 and was very covered and very, very, very shy. And she had, her work was on the walls. Again, UAE had wanted to take her work away, but she'd actually spent 3 months on horseback learning how to ride with the reins under her bum so that she could actually use both hands to take pictures with. And her pictures were fabulous. Now we've got lost again. Oh, hang on. There's Martin Barnes. All of you must know from the V&A. We had some Sophie Rickett who was talking here yesterday. Yeah. Martin did a gorgeous exhibition about the sublime, and he was terrific to work with. And we had Katharina Sieverding and also her daughter Paula exhibiting in the German exhibition, which was great. And now it's Olivia's turn.
Before we move on, can I just get your views on, I just want to know about this, the need to be here. The need for us to discuss what it is to be a woman in photography. I mean, to be considering, where your exhibition was placed for Dubai Photo, there were a high proportion of female curators and photographers, and but it certainly is not representative of A, the Middle East, or B, of, I mean, what's changed in the last 30 years or 10 years or?
I suppose I'd like to think is that we don't have to talk about it as much. When I started at the beginning of the 80s, we had to be very overt about it. And now I think I don't feel like I have to talk about, I make sure that there are women curators and women artists and things that I do. And I think that I am aware because I am a woman that I want to do that.
Yeah.
But I don't think we have to be over. I think it's quite a funny thing. It's because we all like each other that we're sitting here together on the stage. It's not actually because we don't want men to be here as well.
No. That's very the last thing. I mean, I'm interested to hear opinions from men as well, from young men and indeed older men. But
I think that's my answer is I think that it's really. I don't think a huge amount has changed, but I don't think we have to be as clumsy in the way that we're going, oh, well, here we are, let's count the number of women we've got. But I think that I had to actually genuinely, in the Middle East, and you would know this and you would know this, it's not so easy for women to be seen in the Middle East. And so that was quite a struggle to make sure that there were far more women than men in my exhibition. Out of the 868 artworks, I didn't count them, but I'd say more than half were women.
Yeah.
Yes.
Olivia, working in Saudi Arabia or working in the Middle East? Or how important were women's issues to you when you began as a photographer? Did that colour how your thought process, how you worked, or?
So yeah, I mean, it's the thing for me actually is that when I started out, not that I didn't want to do, I hadn't thought about doing women's issues, but I particularly didn't want to. I remember an older photographer saying to me, I went to live in India for a couple of years, and someone said to me, do stories about women. It was like, that'll be, that's what you need to do. And I just, I didn't want to do it. So I went to India and I wanted to do other stories. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was starting out, so I sort of explored. I went all over and I photographed, I wanted to be a photojournalist, I guess, in a more sort of classical sense. And I explored stories, and I think what everyone needs to do as a photographer is sort of find out what actually motivates you, and during that period, over 2 years that I spent there, I found I did want to do stories about women. So I came to it, and I didn't want to be classified as, might as well put a picture up, a women photographer, of course I slightly shoot myself in the foot then by spending several years photographing women and women's stories, but never mind, and yes, there's been a long period since that. I always get called to do a photograph of a woman, to do a photograph of someone whose face can't be shown, and I got fed up with that at some point, and I recently did some work in Dubai. Actually, and everyone said, "Oh, so you're going to do more stories about women?" And I was like, "No, I'm going to photograph men." And I was I really want to photograph men finally. But yes, I got into this. I was very motivated by a lot of the stories that I'd seen in India, and I went on this kind of exploratory several years looking at the idea of women in society and the way they're treated and what the expectations on them are, and it started off with a journey along the border between Europe and Asia, which is where this photograph is from. This is from Istanbul, and this is actually a funny one. I mean, this is a picture that kind of comes up a lot because it's fun. It's got this this sense of she's really posing that she's doing that for the camera, and everybody's laughing and it's a lot of fun. But actually, after I was with a Turkish friend of mine, and after we left, and she said, those older women, they were really having something to say about that girl and how she was behaving in front of the camera. So it's kind of like one of the interesting things is also about how women see themselves. I mean, women actually put this on themselves. They felt that she was being, way too precocious, despite the fact that we were all having fun. So they kind of, we reinforce that ourselves sometimes. So then I went on. I continued this journey. I spent this time traveling along the border between Europe and Asia, and it was a big sort of search to try and understand this idea. I was looking at stories about women. I was also trying to understand this, the idea of East and West and different influences on society. And of course, what happened is I set out with these sort of big, overarching themes, and what I ended up with was getting into individual people's stories. And what I did along this journey was discover my way of working, which was very much about being in an intimate space, being close with people, and I think that's very much what makes me, I suppose, the women photographer more than the subject being about women, and about my approach, the way I was able to spend time with people, and the way people saw me, and the way people let me into their world. As a woman, I was very aware that, and I still am, when I work in all sorts of different places, that people are not as threatened by me as a woman, but also that they don't take me as seriously. And as a result, they kind of let their barriers down, and they sort of let you, they're more honest with you. And I think that I photograph people that I'm able to be friends with, and that's been something that's been important.
Do you have a different kind of female persona? Do you have when you're working as... It sounds stupid. Are you a different kind of woman when you're working? Do you know what I mean?
I think that I don't know about a persona. I think one of the things that probably what shapes a lot of this work, or at least what I show you now here from Saudi, from these places and on that borderline, is that a lot of the time I was photographing in places where I didn't speak the language and where their English would have been very limited. So I think that gives me a different persona more than the female aspect. This kind of, there's a different kind of communication that you have because of that lack of language. But at the same time, I also photographed in India, and I photographed a lot of people who speak English as a first language. I think you find yourself in a zone somehow or other. I went off to explore, and I found myself photographing in a certain way that I hadn't necessarily intended to do. You know, as I say, I sort of set out to be more of a photojournalist. But this is where I felt, this is what I responded to in the end, and this is why I make pictures like this.
Did you have travelling as a woman on your own, particularly? This is in Saudi.
So this is in Saudi now, yeah, this one here.
Were there issues to that, or do you figure that was easier?
So it was, I mean, Saudi is such a complicated, difficult place, so what was difficult there was what was difficult for my subjects. For me, as a foreigner, I had a lot more freedom. You know, it's an incredibly restrictive place, but it's actually not really so much about the. I mean, you know, people talk about the religious police and all that kind of stuff, but actually, it's society that makes it difficult for these women. So this came out of a workshop I taught. This is actually one of the students from my workshop, and I had a lot of problems with trying to get them to do work because the difficulties that they would come up with were things that I hadn't anticipated, like, you know, I can't go and do these pictures because my husband's not free and I can't go and if he won't come with me, or, you know, my driver's busy, or, you know, like things like that. And so there, you know, the difficulties that I had there were about the restrictions on their world, and also not sort of, it was so culturally sensitive. Everything that you did there was so difficult. So this picture was taken in, so, you know, and I also, I struggled with the representation as well, of trying to show, I wanted to show something real, but this, so the previous picture is real in a sense, in that she's wearing a prayer gown to say a prayer at home, but I couldn't photograph her without that on because she wouldn't want to be seen that way. And then I made these pictures that in a women's hostel that I stayed with, which is this whole sort of apartment block, and it's just women, and they had a lot of fun, and we sort of talked about what I was doing, and could I take pictures, and they said, well, you know, we'd love to help you, but you couldn't do it unless we're wearing our abayas. So they put these on, and we did these pictures, and it's actually, they're just laughing. This is kind of joking around. But a lot of people misunderstood these pictures, so to me, this is funny. To them, this is funny. To some people, this is like, what, do they wear that in bed? And, you know, so I kind of, I have to do something more to explain this and to help people. So this is just, you know, again, to show this kind of, the women have been blocked out. It's sort of, you know, the way things were seen there. But there were also some women who would show their faces. And I really struggled with this idea. I mean, this project became as much about women as it was about sort of representation, about being able, like, trying to show something that you're not able to show. And this picture is kind of important for me because they would say, you know, can't you cover the faces or something like that? And I did this with the light that reflects. And when I showed it to them, they said, but, you know, can't you just show a little bit more of her eyes? People can see how beautiful she is. And to me, that was a lot. I mean, that sort of summarized a lot of what I was trying to do, what I was struggling with and struggling against in you know, in the whole kind of trying to make a picture of the society. And they wanted people to see what their world was like. And then sort of on the other end of the spectrum, there were the parties, and there was the, you know, so there's the kissing picture, which I've added in. But yeah, so this was really, I mean, for me, this was kind of getting stuck into this whole world, trying to show it, trying to, you know, I as I say, I ended up being friends with these girls. I was able to make these pictures because we hung out together, and that was obviously. People sometimes say, you know, could you have taken these pictures as a man? And to me, it's even surprising as a question. Like there'd be no question to be in like any of these situations really as a man. Yeah. So I'm going to. Sorry, I'm taking too much time. There's the book, Jeddah Diary, and I just wanted to briefly talk about something completely different. But very relevant to our talk, which is this project that I did 2 years ago now, which was with a group of young women, 8 of us who were the winners of an award in the name of Inge Marath. She's got it now. Inge Marath, the first, in fact, female photographer in Magnum. Darling, play with that one. It's just the same. And we took, so we had all been given this award in her name, and we wanted to do something. Basically, we took an exhibition of Inge's work in this truck along the length of the Danube River. It was a project. It was completely organised by us, by women. If I go back one picture, there, second on the left is the truck driver, and so we were really like entirely a group of women. We were 8 photographers, and we had the driver and 2 coordinators, and it was an amazing project. It's opening, in fact, next week in Madrid as a big exhibition. So I just wanted to sort of put that out there briefly as the thing. It was great to not sit and moan about women not having enough opportunities, but just to sort of do something, and we were able to raise a large amount of money. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to...
Don't worry. Emma, you come from a different, much more editorial, fashion, kind of portrait background.
Yes, I do.
You're very glamorous.
Thank you very much so.
Have you ever do you find that people have dismissed you due to the way you look, or...?
Definitely judged. Women as well as men. It's not just men that judge women, it's other women that judge women as well. But dismissed, I mean, you mentioned in the introduction, I was very young when I started out. I graduated from Goldsmiths when I was 20, and I started shooting editorially soon after that. And then I did my MA when I was 23, and then started doing my own practice as well as editorial photography, as well as running the Blau Gallery. So, and I did look younger than in my early 20s. So I remember a quite famous photographer, who shall remain nameless, coming into the Blau Gallery and coming up to my desk and saying, "I'd like to speak to the person in charge." And I said, "Yes, that's me." And they said, "No, I need to speak to the person who's actually in charge of curating the exhibitions." I said, "Yes, that's me, I'm Emma Blau." He said, "No, but there must be like a board of directors that actually chooses the work." "No, that's me." At which point he still tried to show me his work, but obviously in my head this guy was never going to have an exhibition in my gallery ever. So that's one moment when people were dismissive, but I remember negotiating a book deal, and it was actually a female publisher. No one in this room, but it was not Hannah. No. And a guy in the meeting had asked, you know, "What exactly do you do?" And I explained my various different hats that I wore, and she turned around and kind of looked at me as if I was making it up and said, "But how do you even find the time to do that?" I just thought, "Oh, that's not very," you know. So there's been various things, but I more so when I was a gallery director than as a photographer, I think. Especially when you're shooting editorially, you just kind of have to get on with it. You don't often have very long to take the portrait, so shall I flip through the... So with that in mind, this is Peter Stringfellow, and I went to shoot him at his new nightclub, it was new then, in Soho, and I had a male assistant. Obviously, when we came through the door, he went straight up to my male assistant and introduced himself and asked how he wanted to shoot him. My lovely male assistant then said, "No, this is Emma, she's the photographer," to which Peter said, "Oh, you're a lady." And so we set off taking these pictures. But yeah, he was quite a character. So, but I laughed along with it. I just got on with it. Did I work with Peter? Funnily enough, he's deaf. People don't realise this. And I was shooting quite far away, and I thought he was ignoring me. Because everything I asked him to do, and then suddenly he went, "Oh, I'm really sorry, love. I can't hear anything. It's from all my DJing." But I did, I suppose, a little bit. I mean, I think I've mentioned to you, I've realised that editorially I tend to be commissioned to shoot women of any age or old men. Never nice young boys, sadly. So this is Eileen Phillips, who used to be a judge on Strictly Come Dancing, and I had about 4 minutes to shoot her, as you often do. It was at the BBC, and I think she was a bit self-conscious because she's a real pro and has been in the biz that we call show for years and years. And she was trying to work it down the camera lens, and obviously it was a bit weird for both of us because I don't know, it was all a bit odd. I mean, I got a great shot, but it was just a different relationship. It took her a while to get into it, I think, because again, was it because I was young or was it because I was a woman? Could have been both, could have been either, but there was definitely something she was a bit about. this. So at the same time, I was also working on my own photographic practice, and this was an exhibition I did with people with autism, adults with autism. And interestingly, there's many, many more men that are diagnosed as being on the autistic spectrum. So that's why I included that one. I actually had male assistants for this, and I've used male and female assistants throughout, but there's definitely a different vibe when you bring young male assistants to when you have female assistants. This is Anita Roddick's daughter, Sam Roddick, Kath Kidson, and Sarah Brown. I went to number 10 to shoot her. It was when Gordon Brown was in power. And I included this because it was actually for Easy Living magazine, women's magazine, and it was about feminism. This was about 10 years ago. But each of the women were very, very different characters. And you can kind of see the copy with that, the rebel, the political partner. But, you know, even 10 years ago, was feminism a dirty word, was, you know, quite topical. But this is Tina Brown. This is my shot of Tina Brown, and I included it obviously because she's a very important, powerful woman in the media. It was when I was living in New York. I shot her at home, and Sir Harry Evans was there as well. He was lovely and made me tea. Because often I used to get treated almost like people's grandkids or daughters. I remember photographing Johnny Ball once, and he said, "Oh, you're just like my Zoe. Do you want a cup of tea?" And, you know, so it wasn't really dismissive. It was just kind of falling into those roles. And this was a self-motivated project I did in New York. And I actually thought there was another slide. Hang on. No. Oh, there's a slide missing. I didn't notice that. There was a slide I had of a girl in her underwear, and I was going to say I'd never ask anyone to do something I wouldn't do myself. But that slide isn't there. So that slide's missing. But yeah, so I love shoes. And I interviewed New York shoe designers. And I put this one in because I'm pretty sure some might say that I'm perpetuating that stereotype of women loving shoes and fashion. But I just think I do. And that's all you could do as a photographer, I think, is be authentic and true to yourself. And I love my shoes and I love my hot pants. So that's why I put that one in there. And also, I often got commissioned because I used to do the styling as well, and it was really nice. This is a British shoe designer for a magazine called Shoe, SHOO, my dream publication. And this was I styled it out of a chaotic, cluttered studio, and we collaborated, just two women really who love shoes. This is the designer. And I don't know, would a male photographer have got the same shot? I'm not sure if they would. But yeah, that often I used to get commissioned, particularly because I had that stylist sensibility as well as photographic. Oh, and this is when I did get to photograph some young men. So I put this one in. But this was a lot later in my career, and I just put this in because it is me photographing men, but also it was a much more relaxed shoot. I had a female assistant. They trusted me. It was collaborative. So that's why I put that one in. And this is my latest exhibition project, Face Forward, where I photograph people in my community. And I consciously worked with a female assistant. Well, I had about 5 assistants, but I had a very small studio I was shooting in. And I consciously chose a female assistant because there's a lot of Muslim women that live in the area where I live, where I shot this. And it made for a much more I'm going to be honest, it made for a much more relaxing environment. And I don't think I would have got the portraits I got in the time that I got them if I'd had a male assistant. So those are my...
Do I need the clicker?
And did you, when you're choosing artists to work with, particularly like you're working with Juno Calypso,
Yeah.
and with I've forgotten I keep wanting to call her Jen Davis, and it isn't Jen Davis.
Hayley Morris Caffiero.
Yeah. Do you? Because I know you don't only work with photographers; you work with all manner of artists. What drew you to this work?
What, to Juno's work?
To both of their work, because they're both, artists that use their body within their own within their practice. And
well, they're both really original projects, and they're both using. I'll show you Hayley's work after this. This is Juno's work, and they're all self-portraits. And Hayley's work is also self-portraits, and they're coming at it from a totally different angle. But it was really great this week. Like, I've had such a great week, you know, in my booth at the fair, because I've had Juno there, I've had Hayley there, I had Juliana there, had Sean Davey there, and it was kind of weird because I have never really consciously thought about it. And all of a sudden, we're standing there, all women, in the smallest booth in the fair, by the way. So it's like one in, one out. But it was great. It was really positive. So I think subconsciously, maybe I've been drawn to these projects because I have a kind of interest and affinity with it. But, you know, they are standalone work. I think that Juno's got a universal appeal for what she's doing with you know, what she's saying. And she's only 26. And she's kind of, you know, got a definite kind of energy which comes across. I just go through her works. And so her work explores a lot of femininity. She always gets asked about feminism. It always comes up. And she's got a lot to say about it. But it's weird because, you know, the kind of naked aspect as well. She seems, in these images, especially this one, it's very empowering, this image. And I think, and when she comes to the fair, she has this alter ego Joyce. So she always says, this is Joyce. So anyone with the wig and loads of makeup is Joyce. But actually, it's more of an extension of her. It's not Jekyll and Hyde. It's more like a Juno extension. And when you see her at the fair, she's all dressed in pink, and she's kind of half acting the persona. But when you see her normally, she doesn't have so much makeup on. And it does feel like a very different person. And she feels her age. Actually, it does seem 26 and a young woman, and someone that doesn't necessarily have all the answers. But this feels like she does. It's very kind of decisive and strong. And that's what's interesting working with her, is actually seeing that kind of duality in her work.
For me, when I look at kind of 70s feminist artists like Anna Mendita, who was a body artist, and then I look at artists like her or Polly Penrose, or women seem to have become so much more sophisticated in the way they look at almost similar issues, but in a much more sophisticated way, whether that's because of equipment or just purely because of photographic history and time changing.
Well, it's funny that not people who come to the booth don't necessarily know that these are self-portraits, and sometimes they think it's taken by a man. And the reaction when they find out that it's a self-portrait, they always go, wow, yeah, because it suddenly changes everything. So I'm always very, you know, I let people look and everything, and then I say, you know, and they'll often say, who did this? And I said, well, they're self-portraits. And it's a really interesting reaction because, yeah.
So can I ask you, if this was taken by a man, it would change
Totally. It would be totally different. It wouldn't be the same thing. Totally not. I'll just go through to the next. So I publish books as well, Trolley Books. And this is our last book by a photographer called Sean Davey. And this is about her daughter, Alice. And Alice was born with Down syndrome. And again, working on this project, it is a quite, you know, a female project. And Sean and I met through kind of various means, and she'd spoken to other publishers. And I'd seen it when it was a runner-up at the Bartor Book Award with the Photographers Gallery. And so we met, and I just felt very instinctively that it was something I wanted to work with. And I'd say that the response to it has been, women in particular really respond to it, mothers. And we actually had quite an interesting episode when we were finding a designer for the book. We were recommended someone recommended someone to Sean, and he came and had a meeting. And it was just a really kind of bizarre, I've never seen a kind of mismatch of ideas. He was saying, this book is about Down syndrome, and he chose the most kind of, he didn't have any affinity with the work at all, and he didn't get it. And he basically said, you know, he chose the most kind of institutionalized picture of her to put on the cover, and Sean was like saying, no, it's not about that. And he was like, yes, it is. And he was kind of arguing with her about her own project, and he didn't want to listen to her. So I don't think this book is, just about Down syndrome. It's about family. It's about love. It's about the fear that Sean had about having a child with Down syndrome. So basically, I kind of had heard of another designer who'd been recommended to me, who was a female, and I did a bit of Facebook stalking. And the first picture that came up was her with her 2 toddlers, kids, and I just had a really good feeling. And so I sent her an email. And I said, we're working on this project. I was wondering, if you would be interested. And she wrote back, and her first reaction was like, what a gorgeous little girl. And she totally she understood that it wasn't about Down syndrome, and she was a young mother, and so we worked together, and she was very understated, and it was just a really great match. But it was interesting that I had to kind of play that kind of, thought process to find the right person. And then this is also Alice. This is her. And then this is Hayley Morris Cafiero. So this is the other artist. She's in a group show that we have at the gallery at the moment, which is about the different use of the body. And these are self-portraits. So this is Hayley on the right. And she basically discovered by accident she wanted to do a self-portrait in Times Square about 4 or 5 years ago. And so she set up her tripod, and it was quite inconspicuous because Times Square is so busy that people didn't really associate the tripod with her. And then when she got them back, she realized that there were people laughing at her behind her back and like pointing and going, "Ugh, fatty," kind of thing. And she suddenly thought, hang on a minute, I want to kind of explore this. So now all of her work is self-portraits in public. And she does them very quickly. She hasn't got a tripod. So this beach is a beach in California. It's like a really body-conscious beach. So she kind of goes to places where people are looking. So she went to Barcelona, where everyone's looking at each other. And she doesn't have a tripod or anything that draws attention. She's very quick. And she has someone that helps her, has a camera around her neck, shoots kind of from low down. She's probably standing there for less than a minute, and then she'll kind of get them back and catch the reactions. So it was great that Hayley and Juno met, and they've been hanging out at the booth all week. And Hayley was fascinated. They went off to the VIP lounge, as you do. And they were a really funny couple because they instantly kind of bonded. And Hayley because Juno was all kind of like dressed up, and Hayley saw the attention that she was getting, that everyone was looking at Juno. And she was like, God, I really want to do a project with you. So on Friday night, they kind of plotted. And really kind of funny couple. And so they went to the off-print fair at the Tate, and Juno was wearing this kind of, transparent dress with like a bra and stuff underneath, and she had like a coat, and then Hayley was going to like do the before and after to kind of, judge the reactions. And so Juno done up and not drawing attention to herself, and then, with the kind of dress just to kind of capture it. And it was just really great. Like they were the two doing self-portraits, coming from totally different directions, but they were having a great time playing with their ideas of how they're represented. So yeah, I've had a good week with my all-women booth.
What I'm kind of getting from it is that it's not overt anymore. It's that actually you don't need to beat the subject over the head, and that women are working in positive ways. Yeah,
I think that Hayley in particular, because obviously she was telling me she had really bad reactions, especially from all from men in portfolio reviews. Like she was considered. They thought it was indulgent. It was all the negative stuff. They basically twisted it. And she had one portfolio review guy who just basically kind of just wouldn't even look at her, just turned and just didn't get it at all, didn't think that it was interesting in any way, thought it was wrong, it was totally negative. So she's had to kind of fight to kind of get the work seen. But interestingly, the reaction in portfolio reviews, she's who is it in particular? I can't name names, sorry.
You can, you're amongst friends.
In the VIP bar later.
So, Alex, you spent a long time living within a very male-dominated society, or do you not feel that? Or how did you Tell me about your life.
Okay,
and
going back, you mentioned, of course, I started my career working as a war artist.
Yes.
And that very quickly developed into photography. And I was essentially a frontline photographer working for a lot of the British press. I was on contracts for The Guardian and Telegraph and things. Kind of literally doing the bang bang and going from war zone to war zone, which essentially is always seen as a very, very male job. But I never actually, gender never came into my mind. When I started this, I was always quite a tomboy. I spent my teenage years reading war poetry and collecting magazines on the Falklands. It was just kind of where I came from. It didn't seem strange that I was a woman doing this. But of course I was in a very male-dominated world because essentially I was working with the military most of the time. But I felt very, very conscious that what I needed to do was to prove myself as a woman was, one, I just had to work a lot harder. So people would make kind of comments to me and say, yeah, but you got in there because you're a woman. And you think, no, I actually had to prove myself and live on the front lines and be embedded with the military as a woman. And how do I get away with that? It's just to get respect from them, to show that this is me. I'm really working hard. And then they would respect me back and give me the access and let me do everything. But I suppose over the years, I very, very quickly got very, very fed up with that. I was also very conscious that there is this real stereotype to war photography. I mean, if you just Google image it, you have almost the same photograph sort of repeated of the explosions and the men. And I just got really bored about it, to be honest, and wanted to kind of take a step back and look, what is war and what does it mean and what's going on behind the picture. And I also wanted to get away from this sort of label or tag of being a photojournalist, when I was essentially a journalist sidekick or something with a camera taking pictures. I've always been really interested in stories that haven't been reported or things that weren't being shown by the media, and essentially was probably an investigative journalist just as much as I was a photographer. I was trying to do things that just weren't being shown. But also, I suppose, does that come from a gender point of view? Is it from a woman? Is a kind of big question, because I suppose I wanted to understand more for general people, what does war mean to you? Where are you coming from? What happened at that point that you knew you had to flee from your house? Like, how did it affect your family? And perhaps trying to address some of these things through the photography that probably most men wouldn't. Maybe it's just that it seemed a bit shallow and I wanted to go further. That could be me, just my personality and
something
what
you
I'm interested
mentioned
in.
earlier, which was I just got asked to photograph women. And when I was a photo editor, yes, I would definitely have done that.
That's very true.
Which is really nice.
And
In fact, I always
picked
did.
out some of these slides kind of... No, but not necessarily, Cheryl, because, I mean, another aspect of it, I suppose, through, especially in the later years of my career, which is more than 20 years, I get constantly asked, like every week I get a few emails or phone calls asking to do something about me, and me being a female photographer or a female war photographer or something.
I did that as well.
And it's really, but people are obsessed by it. And to me, I'm not the story. I'm there to tell other people's stories and to report on things that aren't being shown and try to do something else that's slightly more important. I'm not very important in the bigger scheme of things. I'm just kind of the messenger, so to speak. And I've never wanted to be in front of the camera. I want to be behind it. And I certainly have shied away from anything where people have labelled me as a female. I've never once entered an award that was for female photographers, for example. Or, I mean, even when I get asked to do a panel like this, I'm kind of, whoa. But then, Cheryl, when, say, The Telegraph did an article about me, it actually didn't come from the point of view from being a female. It came about me being an eyewitness, and that wasn't the slant. So, but it, you know, in some ways it is true with editors. So just to go through some of the slides quickly, this is from my book we mentioned earlier, A Million Shillings, Escape from Somalia. I'd been working in Africa for 7 years at this time, and also some in the Middle East. So I started to work in Somalia. I think one of the big strengths I have as a photographer is access, trying to work in very, very difficult environments. I went up there on a kind of whim to investigate these little column inches from the newspaper about people drowning in the Gulf of Aden that I kept reading in the African newspapers. It was an area, geographical area I was very interested in. It was sort of where the piracy was starting to happen, and I wanted to go and kind of check it out. And it was also a place where no other photographer or journalist had certainly tried to do this story. People did afterwards, and most of them got kidnapped, or people tried to kill them or anything. So there were no NGOs working there. There was nothing there. I essentially kind of got on a commercial flight and went into Somalia by myself to do this. And in order to do the work, which ended up focusing just on the refugees with the people smugglers and traffickers who were trying to flee from Somalia. It was a journey in which 1 in 20 people died trying to escape from poverty and conflict and everything going on in the Horn of Africa. And of course, in order to do that, I actually had to sort of enter the world of these smugglers and traffickers. Whether I got that more access because I was a woman, I would probably say yes. They kind of trusted me. I wasn't there with a ton of camera gear and trying to be macho or anything. I mean, I was quite vulnerable in that sense. And I suppose that sort of perhaps gave me a level of protection because of being a woman. These are in Yemen, and again, this is with Ethiopians, many of which also escaping from persecution and things in the Ogaden. This is taken, again, this is with people smugglers and traffickers. This is taken on the borders where Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran join. It's, again, one of the world's biggest smuggling triangles because, of course, there's a huge amount of drugs go through there, weaponry, but also people. And, again, it was somewhere that no one else had accessed. It was a place you could only get a flight into. There was one plane a week that sat 5 people, and so I had to spend a week there. There was no foreign forces, no police, no journalist had ever been there. It was, again, sort of a difficult place to access, and it was, again, about traversing these kind of very difficult criminal networks. And I have to say, I suppose, going back to the picture of the smuggler before, this guy Omar, I've come across several smugglers and things, or criminals doing some of this work that actually kind of want me to photograph them. And that's sort of humorous in itself. I feel that that's their kind of machismo and this sort of male bravado, perhaps because I'm a female with a lens. So there are things where I think gender does play into it. This was taken in Afghanistan. I actually then, following the publication of the book with Trolley, I then actually went and I lived in Pakistan for 6 years and based myself there to cover issues there in the region. War had literally just broken out. When I went into Pakistan, that's why I went there. There was a huge displacement of millions of people. And I was also covering the conflict in Afghanistan from there. But from a position where I was never embedded, never with the military, only ever from the civilian point of view. Of course, the stories there, and especially in the Pashtun areas on both sides of the borders in Afghanistan and Pakistan, very, very hard areas to access for anybody. They're off limits to journalists and foreigners, certainly. But I also discovered that by being a woman, that sort of gave me this access because I could kind of go into people's homes. So I might be on a front line as such, and there's literally like helicopter gunships flying overhead and the Taliban down the road. But by being in the house and being able to enter a house, which a man can't do, that I could suddenly find a sort of way to take pictures or to get stories, certainly, from people in the conflict there. What I found, however, by being there, that people, and especially photo editors, as Cheryl mentioned, would always seem to give me jobs where it was about a woman. And it's sort of my pet hate, that it was always the kind of maternal mortality, stories about children, women's shelters, gender-based violence, whatever it was. One, of course, because I can get the access, but also I think that there is this thing where a lot of editors were looking for this kind of very Western gaze of these women that were sort of so off limits and unseen, and they wanted me to perhaps perpetuate this sort of strange foreign male gaze through my lens to get them, which wasn't what I was about, because I was there essentially living with them and staying up there on the front lines with them. But
I think that we wanted to get an honest gaze from you because we trusted you.
Thank
So
you. Well, I hope I did something a little bit better, because otherwise it would be lazy. And I also believe that when you are a photographer, especially if it's portraiture and it's sort of a one-to-one image, for example, that your honesty and who you are as a photographer is very, very much reflected in the lens. And I hope that, you know, a lot of, I think my pictures of women, they do look strong at least, or there's something that shines back and I get an honest sense of who they are. So I hope in that sense that I hope I succeed as a photographer, and I am hopefully honest about them. And then just to finish with, this is much more recent pictures I've been doing with Syrian refugees. I also do teach academically. I teach on the MA at the Danish School of Photography. I have a huge amount of my students who just desperately want to run off and do things on refugees but have no clear idea why and what they're doing. For me, it's very interesting as well, the numbers of students I have who are girls, just to pick up on this. About 50% of the students I have there and anywhere else I teach are always women. But then if you look at the numbers of women that go out into the field and work as photographers, it drops from that 50%, you know, down to kind of 5%. And that, you know, we're always kind of debating where those women go. So just sort of to end on that picture, because again, it's a picture that keeps getting picked up on by people and getting discussed, because it's like, oh, this is a different way of looking at a refugee crisis. Well, yes, because it's something you don't see, but is it about access, or is it about women or stereotypes or whatever?
Thank you. That was very good. I'm really sorry we've run over, because I wanted to have lots of chat, but we haven't. But it would be really nice if anyone stays for 5 minutes, if that's okay. If anybody feels they have something they would like to share, something dreadful or good, or if they have a question for anyone. 10 minutes. Yeah. Thank you. Yay. Okay. Yeah. Let's after Carol, let's ask this. It's nice to hear from her.
It's fantastic to hear all of you and the different perspectives, and you've covered all the issues, which are broad, and especially what you just said about, because I teach sometimes at Central St. Martin's, and there's 60% that are women, and then you go out in the field and there's 5 or 8% that are actually practicing. What happens to them? Where do they evaporate is the question. Why is it so hard for women, unless you're very strong women, I don't know, to have the commitment and the passion to pursue? What do you think?
Well, certainly all the female students I have tend to actually do projects I find much more interesting and engaging. They tend to think more. If a lot of the males will tend to go and do more traditional photojournalism that's perhaps more rooted in the past. And I think a lot of the women are more keen to do something that's engaging or more personal, or think of different ways to show things. And a lot of my students, I hope something down to me, but are being very, very successful at it. So maybe by being a woman myself, maybe I can be some inspiration to them, I hope. But I think it comes down a lot when I think this through. I have to work so much harder out there than some of my male counterparts. Like, I have to prove myself. And it really wears you down. And I think as a woman, you kind of hit a point where you're like, I just can't deal with this anymore. And a lot of women then do take a step back and perhaps go into other sides of photography that are related, but not necessarily behind the camera. Or they just take a different approach at some point in their career.
I think it's got to do, perhaps, I don't know, but particularly students today, the finances. Like, it's so much harder financially. And I think, as Alex said, perhaps, I don't know, they go down other paths that might be related to photography, but not necessarily photography itself.
Have we got any young female photography students here who, or an old one, who actually, do you think about your gender when you're making work? Because when I was a student, it was obviously a very long time ago, all of my work was very much about gender. But do people now...
Yves Klein, and his portraits, moving paintbrushes, which were naked ladies in front of a fully clothed audience with him wearing a tuxedo and basically a string orchestra, painting their bodies on canvases. And I was very upset by that. But then as I walked through, the whole exhibition had an awful lot of female nudity, but there were different artists. And there was a very famous Japanese artist, and I'm really sorry I can't remember her name, but she's mad about dots, and she had...
Yayoi.
Yeah, and her nudity, the nudity that she portrayed, even though she was fully dressed, was such a different hue. And it comes back to what you were saying, Hannah, that somehow or other, a woman portraying nudity puts a different slant on it. And there's a modern photographer, Esther Tieckmann, who has an awful lot of nudity in her work. And I think she is amazing, and I think her philosophy is fantastic. So, yes, your sex does come into it when you're talking about photography.
Shall we take your question?
Hello, hi. Firstly, thank you for leading the way for all the younger females out there. Well done, I commend you. And I've kind of got a two-part question. The first one is, I've been here filming over the last 5 days. There have been 33 talks. There's almost been no women apart from you guys, which is sad. And even weirder, there's been no black people, I've noticed as well. Yeah.
That was a very important point.
Yeah.
Actually, you're really...
Yeah, and
almost more important.
I'd hopefully like to see, I don't know if Bill's in the room or not, but it would be cool if we could see a panel like you guys, but with more ethnic people next year maybe, if that would be possible. But the question I've got is you guys work in an industry that's, well, obviously male-dominated. It's been like that for ages, and it's all European-run sort of thing. But do you think that there's, well, younger people, for me, instance, like I've got nothing but sisters, and my mum raised me, raised by women. So from that perspective, do you think there's younger people that have got they're a bit more awareness, basically, to what's happening in that sense? I don't work in the industry, so just yeah, that's the question really.
I think it's getting a more diverse, more access for younger and a more diverse selection of people having access to what are seen as the important jobs, the institutions, the big culture institutions, because I really do think it needs to filter down from the top. Well, I mean, it needs to come up from the bottom, but there needs to be changes at very, very senior level, I think.
Yeah. So do you think that will go with time, or?
I hope so.
Yeah.
It depends where you live.
Yeah.
My God, we're lucky. We're talking about here, America, Europe and America, and only 15% women. If you're somewhere out, if you're in the Middle East, for example, or in parts of Africa, I was judging the Photo Documentary Awards in Portugal. We didn't have any women.
Yeah.
I was the only woman on the panel, but there were no women. I was like, where are the women photographers? Yeah. And they said, there aren't any, really. And then I said, that's not true. And then I went out and I met, and I said, what do you do? And she's like, I'm a woman photographer. So then I thought, okay, well, there clearly are. What are they talking about?
Yeah. And also you have to think that, the world is made up of 51% women or something, right? Yes. And actually the world is portrayed basically through the eyes of men. I mean, that's how we see it, through the camera. And it's really, really important that the number of women photographers kind of levels the playing field. I mean, I'm in a photo agency with Noor, and we have 1/3 women. I think that's the highest out of proportion out of any photo agency. Yep. And I'm fighting to get it up to kind of half, that we should actually, but also not just women, but also diversity in there as well, because a photo agency like ours should be the eyes of the world. We should actually be telling the truth, and it shouldn't be through a kind of white male gaze.
How many women are there at Magnum? Oh, I mean, it's not exactly.
We're worse than that, for sure. But improving, hopefully. We have... how many are we currently?
Yeah.
We're 5 members and 3 in the pipeline, I think.
Do you know where there's the most amazing women photographers? Iran. And you have Nusha now.
We have Nusha now, yes.
I would hope as well, the fact that it's easier online access now, and it's much cheaper to produce work and disseminate it, I would hope that means more voices are heard.
But I'm just going to say that I think that the Magnum application system is famously very tough, and I think that the fact that the number of women in Magnum is reflected in that. And I think that's also reflective of what we're talking about in general. And I think it's a very tough industry. You have to fight really hard. And there's a lot of women who just say, I'd rather do it my way, like go around the side, find a different approach, and rather than just kind of fighting with the crowd. And I think that gets reflected in the kind of mainstream of who's out there.
Zelda, who was the photographer that you introduced me to the other day? He was in Magnum. Really interesting story, Zelda.
This is Marketa.
Just show the Magnum.
This is a very perfect Magnum story, really. Marketa Luskachova, she's a Czech photographer. She was with Chris Kinnup for a while. She was around at the very formation of Magnum, really. She was asked to be a nominee. She worked incredibly hard. She does very beautiful work. She hasn't stopped working now. She's in her 70s now, and I did introduce her to Hannah here at Photo London. She's here today. She might even be in the audience. She's a very fine photographer, many, many years in Brick Lane on a Sunday morning. Well, Marketa, she was working towards making her portfolio as a nominee. She worked for a year. She put a project together. During that time, she had a baby, Matthew Kinnup. He makes very fantastic films. He lives in New York now. She went to her interview at Magnum with all of the great men of Magnum, with her portfolio of work, and of course the baby, because Chris Kinnup had gone away somewhere else, was no longer being the father of the child. She was on her own, and she was told by the great and the good of Magnum, well, you've got a baby, so therefore your nomination is null and void. And so she...
Okay, yeah, you're talking about an older generation, and I think we should also talk about. And I can't speak for, of course, what's gone in the past, but I will say that I did breastfeed Tare in the back of the meeting last year.
Excellent. So. Have we got any questions or comments or? Have we finished? Yeah. Okay.